Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy,
where we're expanding the conversation around Catholic sexuality.
We're your hosts, Ellen and Kathleen. All right, we are back with another Charting Toward Intimacy episode.
Hello, everybody.
I'm Ellen. Kathleen's here. All right, I'm really excited about this episode because we are talking about foreplay.
Foreplay. What is foreplay?
What is foreplay? Well, before we jump into this week's episode, I want to tell you about one of our partners, Tighten Your Tinkler. I know, really silly name, but you guys, this is a real and serious program. Tighten Your Tinkler is an at-home pelvic floor therapy program that I have personally used and I love. Jen, one of the creators of Tighten Your Tinkler, was actually on a podcast episode about a year ago. Please go check out that episode. I'm going to link it in the show notes. Here's my experience. After having 2 kids, I had some pelvic floor dysfunction, like most women. I had some tightening and loosening in different spots. This led to urgency, it led to leaking, and pain with sex. These are all very common, but as I learned when I talked to Jen on the podcast, not normal effects of pregnancy and childbirth. I bought this program and I got started. And 30 days later, I kid you not, 30 days, I had no leaking. Urgency was basically 0. Some symptoms I didn't even realize were from pelvic floor dysfunction cleared up. And best of all, the pain I had with intercourse disappeared. 1 month, you guys. The code CHARTING50 gets you $50 off the program, which gets you lifetime access to it. Please go check it out in the show notes and help yourself. So before we jump into defining what foreplay is, I want to apologize. So a listener reached out to me on Instagram, and I'm going to keep her anonymous, just in case she has friends who listen to it. That would be embarrassing. Maybe. I don't know. So she reached out and was like, hey, I'm kind of confused because I understand we shouldn't be doing actions that lead to arousal unless we're leading to intercourse. But then also you've said on the podcast that foreplay can last days. And I don't understand that. And I'm so glad if you're the person who reached out to me, thank you so much for asking that question because we haven't been clear in what we mean, what we're talking about. And so we've actually, with the help of my husband, Kurt, he asked for the props for this. He helped us to define 2 very clear categories of foreplay to help you understand what we're talking about with, foreplay, immediately leading to sex, and then foreplay that leads to sex, not immediately. Right. Eventually. Right. So first off, what is foreplay? Now I looked it up on Google, of course.
The Google.
And I got sexual activity that precedes intercourse, which we're going to expand that definition a little bit more because it's more than just sexual activity. And a lot of times it needs to be more than just sexual activity. There are also emotional activities that precede intercourse. So our definition is activities that lead to intercourse. Very simple, so simple.
Yes.
But here's the thing with those activities is intention is key. So we're talking about activities that you are intentionally doing to lead to sex. So some of the examples we're going to give, wouldn't necessarily be foreplay unless your intention was for it to be foreplay. And when we get into the examples a little bit more, it'll make sense. But I just kind of wanted to caveat that intention thing before we jump in.
Definitely. I think, because some of these are going to be able to kind of go between either.
Right.
So that's where intention comes in.
Right. And we'll also talk about arousal threshold as well, because again, some of these activities probably could go in either category depending on where you and your spouse's arousal thresholds are.
Yes, very true.
Because again, we want to make clear that it is important that you are not doing activities that lead to arousal without intercourse following that.
Correct.
This is a moral issue here. Which maybe we'll get into that more in another episode.
In another episode.
Okay, so here's our two categories of foreplay. We have anticipatory foreplay and escalatory foreplay. So anticipatory foreplay, again, very simple definition, things that make you anticipate sex.
Yes.
And as we were like putting these examples together, I was recognizing that these are more emotional in nature, but they can still be physical. Like they kind of have more of an emotional intimacy aspect to them.
Yes.
All right, Kathleen, why don't you give us some of the examples?
So some of these examples of anticipatory foreplay could be like sweet or sexy text messages, leaving sticky notes around the house, doing a long kiss or like whispered promises of things,
Whispered nothings.
Whispered nothings. Yeah. Even doing chores, right? Like could be, if it's within your personality, could be an anticipatory thing. It's some people that would not be in your personality.
Well, and like, I think there's two things to like doing chores, right? It could be like doing chores together, maybe.
Correct.
Possibly.
Number one.
If that's within your personality. I don't know. It probably wouldn't be for me. I don't see that as.
Yeah, no.
But you might be listening going, oh my gosh, like if my husband and I clean the kitchen together, like I'd feel so relaxed and like, that'd be awesome, right? Or like doing chores for your spouse, right? So like taking some things off of your spouse's plate. So it might not even be doing chores, right? Like maybe it's like cooking dinner that night for your spouse, like trying to take things off of their plate, like going and getting their car serviced, like acts of service.
So it's one less thing on their mind when the evening rolls around and they're just like, oh my gosh, I can't. I'm so stressed because I have all of these things, this long to-do list. And you could be like, nope, check those things off, babe.
Right.
Good to go.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Well, and again, like intention here, right? Like, cause you can do these things without it being like anticipatory foreplay, but you also can do them with them being anticipatory foreplay. And so, you can kind of like send a sweet text message of like, hey, I love you. I don't know what this text message would say. I'm really bad at like writing sweet text messages. Like, hey, like I want to have a fun night tonight. Winky face. Like, what can I take off your plate that'll make you like more excited for that? Right. So it's like, you're giving like an intention behind doing this and allowing it to be this anticipatory foreplay.
Yes. Also, within the realm of sweet text messages, never underestimate the power of a, hey, thanks so much for all you do.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's a good one.
Listen to Ellen's sigh there. Just listen to that sigh, okay? Just some everyday appreciation being verbalized. Like, I know my husband tells me on a very regular basis, like, how I do so much, I'm the rock of the family, like all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I'm not saying like every day, but like, I mean, I would say maybe once a week, he will tell me those things. And every time he does, it is just like, wow, thank you so much.
Right.
Like, and it does kind of make you be like, you are just like the best man for being able to like see that and like appreciate it in me.
Yeah.
And it makes you kind of be like, I'll jump your bones. Yeah, for sure. Right. Like,
no, totally. I got one of those last week.
And it takes like no effort.
Oh, so easy. Gentlemen, if
you
are listening to this, or husbands, I mean, I know we have some like non-married men listening and some priests, like this obviously doesn't apply to you.
But it's good advice for you to give to any married man.
Oh my gosh, please give this advice. But I mean, we are serious here. Like I got one of those last week and I was just like, oh,
right. It is like swoon. Oh my goodness. Swoon. Yes. Okay. But anyway, couple more anticipatory, examples would be dancing.
Yeah.
Could be that's a very romantic, activity, which
like
I think
going
romance,
going out dancing, right? Like, and then that can be anticipatory of of like intercourse later, right? Like it can really like build that unity and emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
While also being physical, right? Like this is kind of what I was trying to explain earlier with like, these are kind of more emotional in nature, but can absolutely still be physical things. Like dancing is a very physical thing.
Right. But it builds this emotional intimacy that then creates desire for the physical intimacy.
Yeah.
Another thing, again, if it's within your personality, is cooking together can be a lot of fun. We're not huge on it personally. Because
also have 5.
I cook a lot.
You have 5 kids. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of cooking going on out of pure necessity that it's the last thing I want to do to build intimacy.
Right. But like sometimes like baking together. My husband and I like baking together because it's like, it's not something that we like do all the time, or like sometimes like during nap time. See, this is something that falls into my personality, but like not Kathleen's. So again, these are just like examples of things that came from us, right? So like you may not jive with any of the examples that we gave,
and that's okay.
And like if there are other examples, like let me know on Instagram, and like, or if you have questions of like, hey, would this fall into like anticipatory, please reach out. Like I'd love to chat more about this. But but yeah, like my husband and I, like it is emotional intimacy building to like work on a new recipe together and kind of like be like head chef, sous chef, and like, you know, somebody's helping and doing things. Hey, can you do this step for me? And I'll do this step. And like, that's something like fun that we do together. And I think with proper intention, like it absolutely could be anticipatory foreplay. I'm not sure that we've ever done it with that intention. I think it's just something like we've done together because we just kind of like doing that and want to do that. But again, like intention is key here. And like verbalizing that intention. Because I think the worst thing with all of these anticipatory activities, the worst thing that could be done is assuming that these are anticipatory foreplay, right? So assuming that taking your husband or wife's car to go get serviced for them is going to lead to sex. Like please do not do that. But like the example that we gave with like sending a text message and saying, hey, what can I take off your plate? Or like, would it be helpful if I did this to take that checklist off? Those kinds of, then you can build that, you know, anticipatory foreplay-ness.
Right. Yeah.
The activity.
No, I think that's a really good point, because a little bit of what, you know, we said how like intention is big with all of this, but I think even some of these things could be interpreted differently based on a female and a male perspective. So that communication is very clear. Like, you know, something like a long kiss, right, can be anticipatory for a female, but that could also be very escalatory for a male, right? So possibly. And that's just very much a generalization. It could also be reversed, right? But but the point being that communication on what the expectation is here is going to be very important, because each spouse could interpret it a little bit differently.
Yes. Yeah. So clarity of intention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the second category, and then we'll kind of parse them out a little bit more too, and sort of talk about, because like, again, some of these activities can fall into either category depending on intention and depending on like your arousal threshold. So escalatory foreplay is things that lead to arousal and then sex, right? So things that are going to physically and mentally arouse you, or physically and mentally. So these things are more physical in nature, but they can still be emotional, right? So where anticipatory things were more emotional in nature, but could still be physical, escalatory is more physical in nature, but can still be emotional.
Yes. Yep. Perfect.
Do you want to do the examples?
Yeah. So some examples of these could be massages. Who doesn't love a good massage?
And like maybe even particularly sensual. massages,
Yes,
right? Because
exactly.
we talked about before we started recording that like massage doesn't necessarily need to be escalatory foreplay. Like
Right.
there's a level of massage that is absolutely escalatory foreplay. And that's going to be different for every couple. It's going to be different, like depending on where your arousal threshold is and things like that. But you know, like, I mean, one example might be like with or without clothes on, right? Like, and again, like it might fall into different categories for you, but that's pretty obvious that like, all right, if you're giving a naked massage, like that's probably escalatory foreplay. Let's be honest. All right.
Very true.
If you're giving a massage like with shirt still on, like that still could be escalatory foreplay, but it also might just be, hey, honey, my shoulders are totally tense. Can you give me a massage? And that doesn't, it doesn't like, you don't have to be like afraid of doing a massage, right? You don't need to be afraid of touching.
Yeah. In fact, not good practice if you are afraid of touching.
Please don't be afraid of touching.
Yeah. We 0 out of 10 do not recommend.
Yeah.
All right, more examples. Strip poker, another card game, or like any game, really.
Right. Any strip version of a game.
Yes. Fun,
you can do
game.
strip versions of all sorts of games. I don't know if you've heard of the game Qubits, but we've played strip qubits before.
Wow. I actually have not.
Oh, it's a great game.
It's
a fun one. It's like a puzzle game.
That is really fun. Okay. Making out, very obvious, but very underrated. I think sometimes, yes.
I know people are always like, making out is for high school students. Like,
no, it's literally like, let's like pretend we're in high school again. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Like the hormones that just are released just from kissing, and like make a rule, like you're just making out, no touching, right? Like just making out. I think when sometimes you take sex off the table, it like increases desire like tenfold. Right. It's like, no, we're like, it's not happening right now, or it can't happen for like another hour.
Right. Like we're doing this like in it, in it's still escalatory. So, you know, we're not saying like do it and then don't have sex. Like that's not what she's saying. Right. She's saying like,
not the point.
Like we're going to do this, you know, kind of sex is off the table for the time being, right? Like we're this
like literally set a timer if you need
set a timer.
Right? Like where you can look at it and be like, oh my gosh, we still have half an hour, we have to like wait, how are we going to do that? Right. Makes it a lot more fun.
Love that.
Talking about like what sexual activities you would want to participate in together, and
Kathleen and I went back and forth on this one of where it fell. And we decided to put it in escalatory because it may not be escalatory for one spouse, but it will likely be escalatory for the other spouse. And generally speaking, this may not be escalatory for women. Like most of our listeners are women. Like you might be listening going, that's not going to lead me to arousal. Like, but, Kathleen was like, reminded me that I'm not a man. Haha. Surprise, surprise.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But that this particular conversation is very escalatory for someone who has like a low threshold for arousal. And isn't necessarily like a reactive arousal.
Yeah. Taking a shower or a bath together. Always very fun.
And again, intention is key here because we also discussed this one before we started recording. And I was like, I don't know. If your intention is to lead to sex, this is absolutely an escalatory foreplay thing.
Yes.
If your intention is to lead to sex, this is not something you could do in the morning and then have sex later in the evening.
Right. Yeah.
If you're just taking a shower together to save time, and probably some people listening are like, how could couples ever do that? But let me tell you, there are couples that can do it.
And couples that can't.
And there are couples that can't. So you need to, self-assess
yes,
your relationship, right? But like, there are couples absolutely who can like just save time by showering together.
Yeah.
I would say like a bath probably never would fall out of the category. Like I feel like taking a bath together, like that is escalatory. Absolutely.
Yeah, I hear you.
But yeah, I was just throwing out that like taking a shower together can be just a time saving measure.
If you're one of those couples.
If you're one of those couples. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
We're one of those couples.
That is so funny. Okay, moving on. Having fun with food. Think like whipped cream
on bodies.
Sauce,
yeah.
Right? Like cherries, I don't know, strawberries,
whatever you want to do.
Whatever you want to do. And then obviously, what's that?
I've heard of the donut thing.
I have not heard of the donut thing.
I don't know.
I'm sort of imagining what the donut thing might be.
The donut has a hole.
Wow. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. I guess when you said a donut,
I've never tried it. I don't know.
That is so funny.
You'd have to be very careful with that one though, because, arousal versus, actual climax.
Intention.
Climax needs to happen.
It should really only be one thing with, it sounds like maybe the donut.
Yeah.
The donut.
Just be careful with that one. Like it could work. It would absolutely be licit so long as it was simply for, foreplay and not actual climax. But I've heard of it before. I don't know. I've never tried it.
That is really funny. Nor I. Wow. We're all learning something new today, friends. All of us.
This is not going to be the clip that I share on Instagram.
Yeah. I think maybe it should be. We might get a lot of listens.
Oh, dear.
Okay. And then lastly, these are pretty obvious. Manual stimulation and nipple play.
Yeah. Those are pretty escalatory. I don't think there's any gray area.
Anticipatory in any way.
No, not at all. But what could be anticipatory is like different areas of touch.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like, I'm thinking like a butt smack. If that's your thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I get lots of those around here. My kids are like, Daddy, why you do that?
I love that.
As I'm doing the dishes in the kitchen.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, like something like that absolutely like could be anticipatory foreplay. We're talking about like manual stimulation, like stimulating the genitals. Yes. And again, the caveat that this is very important that in intercourse, the man needs to climax inside of the woman. This is very important. That is the design of the act. The sperm belongs in the vagina. He cannot climax outside of the woman. And so, manual stimulation is absolutely fine so long as it is part of foreplay. And then, of course, again, because I'm going to be like, people are going to be like, manually stimulating the woman to climax is fine as long as it is within the act, within the one act of intercourse. So that can be before the man climaxes. It can be during actual penis in vagina intercourse. It can be after, right? Whatever situation you've got going on. But it needs to be within that one act. It can't be like a couple hours later. Like you're like, hey, that wasn't fair. I didn't climax. Like, get me to it. Like, that's a new act. Right.
Right. Yes. Very important clarification.
But yeah, so I think we just kind of want to clarify just a tad bit more on like these examples are simply examples.
Yeah.
And they're the examples that Kathleen and I thought of, and a little bit of Google. There are going to be things that you think of or that you currently do that were not mentioned in here. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. But, intention is important. And your threshold of arousal, of you and your spouse, right? So like if you yourself have a very low arousal threshold, you need to be honest with yourself about what kinds of things fall into the escalatory category and the anticipatory category. Because some of the things that we mentioned in the anticipatory category might just totally send you off the rails.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful. That's wonderful that you have, you know, some kind of activity that you or your spouse can do that can like get you to that spot. That's great. But make sure that it is, it's used in proper context, right? And it's used within the immediate, timeline of intercourse happening, right?
Yes.
And that you're not kind of trying to get you or your spouse aroused outside of that immediate timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really, really important.
What else? What other thoughts do you have?
You know, I laugh sometimes because I feel like he forgets sometimes, not all the time. But before, while we were engaged, I remember Michael said, like in a conversation we were having with some people, a wise man once told me that foreplay begins 24 hours before intercourse. And I was like,
yeah,
those are wise words.
That's a wise man who said that.
And we hearken back to them every once in a while. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, and I've heard the phrase, foreplay begins immediately after intercourse ends, like foreplay for the next time, right?
Right.
And what we're talking about is this anticipatory foreplay, right? These acts of service, this emotional intimacy that you can build, and husbands, if you're listening, or like maybe your wife said, "Hey, you really need to listen to this episode."
Take a hint.
Take a hint. Take a hint, guys. Like it might need to be really obvious, right? It might need to be a text message that clearly says, "Hey, I think you're super hot. You do so much for our family. I love you so much. Like, can we have sex tonight?"
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It might need to be that obvious. And that, for a lot of women, is going to be really wonderful anticipatory foreplay, because now it's going to be on our mind all day and we can start thinking about it, and we can start like reminding ourselves of the things that we like, or thinking about like what we want to do. Right. Yes. I love this like sticky notes around the house idea. Like it's like a little Easter egg hunt. Yeah. I don't know. I like Easter egg hunts.
That's really funny.
But I mean, like, and they could just be like super, like this could be like a drawing of a heart.
Yeah.
Or just, "I love you." Or like drawing a winky face. Yeah. "I like your butt."
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah. So anyway, husbands, if you're listening, your wife probably sent you to listen to this episode for that idea. Just kidding.
Thing is, that particular activity takes planning.
Yeah.
And in advance and preparation, which I will say, we got like two likely ADD minds over here. Like we are awful at planning and preparing. So it's one that may not happen for us, but it is a great idea if you're a planner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a prepper.
All right. So I hope that clarifies what we're talking about when we're like, hey, yeah, foreplay can last a couple of days. Like we're talking about this anticipatory foreplay. Yes. And then the escalatory foreplay. Last thing before we close out, like this escalatory foreplay can be as short as a couple of minutes, or as long as even more than an hour, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't, you don't have to like, don't categorize yourself too much on like hard lines, but the escalatory foreplay really should be this, really intentionally leading directly to sex.
Yes.
Versus the anticipatory is much more like sex is going to happen at some point in the future, and I'm preparing myself for that, but we don't have an exact time, right?
Right.
And escalatory is like, okay, we are doing things that are leading to sex, like
right now,
within the next hour or two, right? Like this is happening, right? And then also, like, again, please don't like put yourself too much in just like a box and like a defining line. Like anticipatory can very seamlessly lead to escalatory, right? You might be cooking together and that turns into having fun with food and then having sex on the couch instead of in the bedroom upstairs, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But we just wanted to like create these categories to kind of explain what we're talking about when we're saying, oh yeah, like foreplay. Sex is not going to last a couple days. Foreplay can last a day or two or a week, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.